Welcome into the Commanders Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and today we're going to be breaking down my list of cut candidates for the Washington Commanders as the 2026 offseason is now here. These are players that the Commanders can certainly think about cutting to save some extra cap space so that they can build out this roster for the 2026 season. Now, before we get into the content today, get us started down there in the comments section by letting me know which Commanders player will surprisingly not be on the team in 2026. And this can be a cut candidate, this could be a trade candidate, or anything that you guys want to dream up here. Which Commanders player do you think will surprisingly not be on the team next year? Let me know to kick off today's show. So the first thing I want to discuss before we get into our list today is where the starting point is for the Washington Commanders before all these cuts and restructures and all these different things that we're expecting from the Washington Commanders this offseason in terms of their cap space. And they're currently slated to have just over $68 million in cap space as it stands right now. That is currently 6th in the National Football League. But like I said, guys, that is before cuts. And I do think that there are some places where the Commanders can cut the fat a little bit here. So we'll start with Marshon Lattimore, the easiest one on the list. This one is almost a done deal already, especially with the weapons charge he just got in Ohio. Marshon Lattimore will not be a Washington Commander in 2026. And you get to save quite a bit of money by making this move. You save $18.5 million by letting go of Marshon Lattimore, who just didn't play very well this past season. This team put a lot of faith in him to be a legit number one lockdown corner. They spent some pretty decent draft capital to get him at the trade deadline a couple of years ago, and unfortunately, he just hasn't been up to snuff in a Washington Commanders uniform. And the fact that you can save $18.5 million without having to take on any dead money makes this one, frankly, a no-brainer if you can't trade him somewhere else. But then we get to Frankie Luvu, and this is one that I think might be a little bit more surprising because I think some Commanders fans feel like, Luvu's still a good player and all these different things, but if you designate him as a post-June 1st cut, you can save $8.9 million, and you only have to take on $2.3 million in dead cap. And when you look at a guy like Frankie Luvu, I just don't think he played as well as, some people may think that he did this past season because of how well he did play in 2024. This guy was a borderline all-pro level linebacker 2 seasons ago, and this team went to the NFC Championship game, but last year it just wasn't very good. Now, Pro Football Focus grading is not gospel, guys, but he's ranked pretty low in almost every single category that you kind of think of in terms of the Pro Football Focus grading. He missed a ton of tackles, over 20% missed tackle rate. That is like the 5th lowest, or the 5th highest, I should say, among linebackers, ranking 112th out of 116 linebackers. And, for somebody that's, slated to have over a $10 million cap hit for this team next year, that is just not worth it, in my opinion. And I just think that, if nobody wants to trade for Frankie Luvu, it probably makes more sense to let him go, designate him as a post-June 1st cut, and let him go and get younger and faster and more reliable in the linebacker room next year here in Washington. So predict it for me down there in the comments section. Will Frankie Luvu be a Commander in 2026? Simply give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section. For me, I think there's a decent chance that they let him go to save some extra coin for NFL free agency and get younger and faster in that linebacker room, with Bobby Wagner also slated to leave this room here in 2026. This will be the pinned comment on today's show. So in just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today. While I do that, simply give me a yes or a no down there in the comments. And with that, let's have a word from our sponsor today here at Prize Picks. And guys, the big game in Santa Clara is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than with Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that means it's your last chance to get into the football action here before next season. So close the season out right with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. With the new social feeds feature, you can share Prize Picks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. And a new feature from Prize Picks that they have right now is early payouts. If your player gets off to a hot start, you have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. You guys can check out my Prize Picks lineup here for conference championship weekend here. I'm taking the more on interceptions for Jarrett Stidham. Sorry, Broncos fans. I'm taking the more on rush yards for Ramondre Stevenson, the more on touchdowns for Puka Nacua, and more on Sam Darnold passing yards. If you guys want to download the Prize Picks app today, you guys can use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Next on my list here of cut candidates is Quan Martin, another guy that really disappointed for the Commanders in 2025. You can save $3.7 million against the cap, and you barely have to take on any dead money by letting him go. And Quan is somebody that, this one kind of stings because he was supposed to be one of your breakout players at the safety position this year, and if anything, he regressed from, a kind of lackluster as an okay 2024 season, but people kind of expected, okay, he took that next step in year 2 from year 1, where he was frankly awful, but then he kind of went and regressed back to that here in 2025. And now there's a question of what do you do with Quan Martin? And for me, there's 2 options that you guys can think of. Number 1, you can move him over to the nickel position where he played his college ball, and he played a little bit in year 1 at the nickel spot here in Washington. I think he'd have a brighter future and a better chance to succeed long-term at nickel, or you can trade or cut him. All right, if someone wants to trade for him, you get another draft pick for him, fine. If you want to cut him and save the extra $3+ million in cap by letting him go, that's also a possibility. But I could also see Washington, legitimately keeping him. He is a former high draft pick, yes, for a different regime, but he was one of the best nickel defenders in college football when he was playing for the Illinois Fighting Illini. Mike Samerstill, who this team drafted to be a nickel, looks like he's going to be moving to the outside in the future. Noah Igbenogany is a free agent, so if you want to go with the strategy of, okay, Quan, we're going to move you from safety, where frankly you are absolutely terrible, to nickel, where you might be at least serviceable or at least a pretty decent player. I could see that being a possibility. I could also see them bringing in some competition at the nickel spot. So if Quan doesn't make that transition back to nickel nicely, he can be a backup player for you with some experience and chemistry with the players on this team. I'm not saying it's a for sure thing that they let go of Quan Martin, but hey, $3+ million in cap space is not nothing. And if Quan Martin is not going to be somebody that contributes to your defense, then I do think it could make some sense to let him go as well. And then the first 3 players that we discussed on today's show, Marshon Lattimore, Frankie Luvu, and Quan Martin, are all on our trade candidates list as well. We also just put out a video this week on the trade candidates, the top trade candidates for the Washington Commanders, where I also talk about the chances of maybe getting a day 3 draft pick for any and all of these 3 players. And I think the Commanders should have the approach this offseason where if you can get a day 3 draft pick for Marshon Lattimore, Frankie Luvu, or Quan Martin, they should probably pull the trigger on that, because not only do you get the cap savings, but you also get an additional draft pick to get younger and faster on this Commanders roster this season. And then some 2 final cuts here that they can do to save some money for players that really don't play all that much. Percy Butler is the backup safety, and there was a lot of opportunities for Percy to come in and play potentially, and he couldn't even beat out Quan Martin for the starting free safety job this year when Quan was playing really bad football. So you can save a little bit over $2 million by letting him go for a backup free safety. I think that one probably makes a lot of sense for the Commanders. And then Nick Allegretti, where you guys can save $6 million. The Commanders can save $6 million by cutting their backup guard. And Allegretti's got some experience starting on this team and all that different stuff. He's played some center as well, but he's just not a very good football player, guys. And if you designate him for a post-June 1st cut, like Frankie Luvu, you can save some additional coin, and $6 million by cutting your backup guard, I think would be a pretty darn good decision for the Washington Commanders this year. And there's a bunch of other smaller names that you can think about cutting as well, but these are probably the 5 biggest names that the Commanders can possibly think about letting go. And then if they do make all these moves, if they do cut all 5 of these players today, you would save quite a bit of money, and you would take your 61 whatever it is $1 million to start the offseason, and then you'd be going into free agency with over $100 million to spend in free agency and cap space. So that's a pretty decent amount of money to build out your new roster with, to get some younger players in free agency that might cost a little bit more money. Last year, obviously, this team had over $100 million to spend in free agency last year, and I don't think that they really utilized that money all that well. They finished the year here in 2025 with some of the most cap space available to them. It seemed like that they really didn't take their opportunities that were out there to build this roster. I'm hoping Adam Peters and Dan Quinn can take a different approach here in 2026 and use up this money and try to take advantage of Jaden Daniels' rookie contract. Now, that'll be it for today's edition of the Commanders Report by Chat Sports, guys. Real One roll call here to finish up today's show. If you made it to the end of today's program, that helps out the YouTube algorithm today, so really would appreciate it if you type those real ones down there in the comments so we can give you some love for making it to the end of today's show. And that'll be it for today's program, guys. We'll have more Commanders content coming your way throughout the weekend. Of course, the search search for the next defensive coordinator here in Washington continues on. We'll get you guys updates all throughout the coaching search until we have our new DC. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Until next time, guys, hail to the Commanders.